The next word that we come to in the list of the 10 words is one about idols. Word number 2 is this: you will not make for yourself an idol. Here's how this shows up as we actually read Deuteronomy chapter 5. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. The likeness of anything above or on the earth or even below is forbidden. And so really what we're talking about here are sort of 3 different realms to the earth. And I think in the ancient Israelite worldview, this would have been the way they would have thought about the world. And so what you have is you have the heavens up here, right? This is the heavens. And then down here, you sort of have the earth. And then there's the waters, right? And so the heavens above, this is the sky dome, the realm where God sets the different pieces that govern the day. And then you have the earth down here. And then you have these waters. And these waters are often associated with chaos, and they are located under the earth. It makes sense if you think about it. As you come to sort of the edge of the earth, what do you see but a slope going down, and then the waters descending. I think we even see this at play in Scripture. Psalm chapter 24 says, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all those who dwell therein, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers." Again, I think here in their mind, the earth has been founded upon the waters. Or how about this in Psalm 104, verses 1 through 3? "Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord, my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment." Then listen to this: "Stretching out the heavens like a tent." Stretching out the heavens. "He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters," and that is the waters above. "He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on the wings of the wind." I think in an ancient Israelite mind, God dwelled up here in the heavens. There is water above the earth, and then there is the earth itself, and then the waters that are below. These are the primary categories for how they thought about the world. And so what the people are warned about in this word is that they are not to create for themselves an idol, an image of anything that dwells in any of those 3 areas, any of those 3 spaces. And really, I think this brings us back to creation. In Genesis chapter 1, God created the lights to rule in the heavens. In fact, Genesis 1 says that God made the greater light and the lesser light and the stars, and he set them in this rakia, the sky dome. He set them in the heavens, and their job was to govern, to rule day and night. Then he made people to dwell upon the earth, to rule in the world below. That was their job, to govern, to rule. But then he also made creatures to fill the land, and he made creatures to fill the sea. In fact, one fascinating piece in Genesis chapter 1, it says that God even made the taninim. These are creatures that are found elsewhere in Scripture. They're almost like sea monsters or chaos monsters. They were associated with chaos in the ancient world and signs of disorder. And yet Genesis 1 tells us God created even that. And so the creatures that live in the waters below, the animals and humans that realm over the land, the heavens above, where the sun, moon, and stars, where they are set in place. In all of these areas, you will not make for yourself an image, because God made all of these things with his personal word. When we arrive at the 10 words, God makes it very clear. I myself created these things, so don't go making an image in the light of one of them. God is going to have none of that. You see, idols were very common in the ancient world. The making of images sort of aligned with cultural practices all around Israel, the people who lived around them in the land of Canaan, but even in the land of Egypt, there were gods found everywhere, right? The idea was that this image could come to represent an invisible deity. So the deity would have this connection to the idol, and if I created an idol and then sort of enlivened it with the spirit of the deity or the presence of the deity, then wherever I took that idol, the deity would sort of follow. In fact, if I wanted to force the god to be somewhere or force the god to see something, it was a way of sort of divine manipulation. I could bring the idol with me. And even in the context of Deuteronomy, God makes it clear that this is not permissible. In fact, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 15 says this, "Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you at Horeb, at Mount Sinai," Exodus chapter 20, when God gave them the 10 words the first time. He says, "Out of the midst of the fire, beware lest you act corruptly by making a carved image for yourself in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth." Why? Because remember, you didn't see anything. You saw the smoke, you saw the lightning, you saw the fire on top of the mountain, but you did not see any form. Therefore, don't make a form that is somehow a representation of me. Nahum Sarna says this, "Since God spoke to Israel directly from heaven without the mediation of idols, it seems that idols are not necessary for this purpose." Maybe in other religions, you have to have an idol in order to communicate with the deity. You have to have an idol in order to get the deity to bless you, but not in ancient Israel. Not for the people who followed Yahweh. They were to make no idols, no images whatsoever. But here's what's more. Humanity itself was, I think, intended to be the image of God. In fact, Genesis chapter 1, God says, "Let us make man in our image." And this word image can be used in other places in the Old Testament to refer to idols. In other words, humans are like God's idols, running around the world on his behalf and doing the ruling for him. You see, God does not allow for idols, but part of the reason is that he made people for that very purpose. God has a very specific job for humanity. They don't receive worship on behalf of deity like other idols might. However, they do have this role of ruling and reigning over God's creation in what they do. Therefore, the people worshiping and serving idols is especially terrible. I mean, if you think about it, right? People themselves were made to be the image of God. So if they would form something else and then bow down and worship that, it's almost as if they're spitting in the face of their Creator, saying, I don't like how you have made me. But notice what God goes on to say. He says, "For I am a jealous God." The Hebrew says El-Kanah, and it may very well be just a title for God. He is God. He is El-Kanah, the jealous or impassioned one, like a husband is for his wife. And in fact, he is jealous and punishing even into the third and fourth generation. Now, I like how Daniel Block talks about this as more of a horizontal punishment rather than vertical. Really, it's the family that's all gathered in one house that really is going to make up third and fourth generations. And so, if one person sins, everybody that is in that household is going to experience the communal effects of sin. I think all of us have lived enough life to realize that when one person in our family or one person close to us in our community sins, oftentimes that has ripples that affect even us, right? Sin is always communal. I think this is even confirmed in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 16. Here's what God says. "Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin." In other words, God is not saying here that he's going to kill all of the kids for a sin that their grandfather committed. Instead, I think he's saying each one bears the weight of his own sin. However, we have to remember that sin has consequences. Of course, God's loving kindness will extend far beyond just 3 and 4 generations. It extends all beyond the immediate family, even especially, I think, for those who choose to attach themselves to the Messiah. Thousands of generations. And surely the contrast between 3 and 4 and thousands makes it clear for us. Here's what Patrick Miller says about this. He says, "The scales are tipped. The divine character is weighted toward mercy." So then, absolutely no idols. But what other text in Deuteronomy does this seem to connect to? How does the rest of Deuteronomy unpack this one idea? Well, I think where we see this play out is in Deuteronomy chapter 12. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, the people are moving into the land, or they're talked about what's going to happen when they move into the land, and they're instructed to destroy all of the idols. They tear down the altars that the Canaanites have built in the land. They dash their pillars to pieces. They destroy their Asherim with fire. They chopped down their carved images. They destroy the name of the gods from these places. Absolutely no idols. And if they didn't do that, then they would be tempted to worship them. If those places would remain, those high places on these hills would remain, the Israelites over time would be tempted to worship them. In fact, we know that they were tempted to worship them. It says several centuries later that a king had to tear down the bronze snake that Moses had set up in the wilderness because the people had even made that an idol, something that was supposed to point to Yahweh. Instead, the people should worship Yahweh and Yahweh alone. They could offer sacrifices wherever he established. And I think we have an allusion here to the future site of Jerusalem in the temple that would be built there. And I think this protects against syncretism and protects the people from the wrath of a jealous God, Elkanah, one who is jealous, impassioned for the worship of his people. But it's not just that they're not allowed to worship other gods. There's also a generous invitation here. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, it says that the people may enter into Jerusalem, or they may enter into the place where God causes his name to dwell, and they may celebrate there. In fact, they're told to rejoice in God's presence. They should bring along everyone with them, bring along their family, bring along their servants, bring along the Levites who are in their town so that everybody can worship and celebrate together. And so, what does it look like to live out no idols as you move through the book of Deuteronomy? It looks like smashing all of the idols once you move into the land, but also directing your hearts to proper worship. You make sure that you worship God and worship him with all of your heart. And so, as we make the transition for us, how might we be able to shema this word today, or hear the word today so that we can change our lives? Maybe it would just help for us to reflect on what our worship should look like. What is proper worship of Yahweh? Well, I think proper worship connects to our experiences with our God. Our worship is a response to his action that works itself out in all of our lives. Do we celebrate before him? Do we ensure that he gets the first of all that we have? In fact, do we joyfully give to him out of every paycheck because we know God has so graciously given things to us? Or instead, do we find ourselves worshiping at altars, perhaps even altars we have made with our own hands? Do we find ourselves worshiping idols that we ourselves have constructed? Idols of money or fame or prestige or work or sex or control. Perhaps Deuteronomy is calling all of us, even today, back to proper worship. A worship that worships the Father in spirit and in truth. And in the world Moses envisions for us, we don't have other idols. We don't bow down before man-made creations. Instead, we listen to the voice of the Lord our God, and we allow it to lead us into proper worship. I think maybe just to finish up, we could hear the words of Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 and 13. These are God's good words about what worshiping should look like. Here's what Moses says. "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and the statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God, belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. And so, I think for us living today, this is a picture of wholehearted devotion. May we choose to turn our hearts to God and worship him in the way that he desires.